I was 25 years old when the walls of my life came crashing down. In a single evening, everything I thought I could lean on shattered, and I found myself standing on a road that no longer led home. I had grown up in a small Texas town where everyone knew your name, where families stayed in the same houses for generations, and where stepping outside of what was expected of you was seen as an offense, almost a crime. I knew for years that I was different, and I knew my father would never accept that difference. But knowing it in your head and feeling it slam into your chest like a steel hammer are two very different things. That night, I felt it with every breath, and it nearly broke me. The argument started the way so many had before, with my father's sharp voice slicing through the air like a whip. He didn't shout in the way some men do. He didn't need to. His words always carried weight, the kind that crushed you even when you try to stand tall. He called me irresponsible. He said I was weak. He said I was refusing to be the man he had raised me to be. He never mentioned the truth directly, never spoke the word out loud, but I knew what he meant. He knew who I was, and he despised it. My mother sat in her chair, hands clasped tightly together in her lap. She kept her eyes down, not daring to look at me, not daring to look at him. Her silence spoke louder than anything she might have said. She wasn't offending me. She wasn't standing up. She was siding with him by doing nothing. That cut deeper than I expected. When you grow up believing your mother's love is unconditional, you never quite prepare yourself for the moment when it vanishes behind lowered eyes. And my sister, God, I can still see her. She stood in the doorway, frozen, her body stiff as though she wanted to say something, but her lips never moved. She didn't speak up, didn't whisper my name, didn't tell him to stop. She just turned her face away, as though I were already gone, already erased from the family picture. In that moment, I wasn't her brother anymore. I was a stranger. My father's final words are burned into me like a brand. If you don't want to live by this family's values, then you don't belong in this house. It was a sentence, a judgment, a declaration that I was no longer welcome under the roof I had grown up beneath. He stood there with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, eyes cold and unflinching. He didn't waver. He didn't give me an inch of mercy. He wanted me out, and he wanted it now. I tried to read my mother's face, to find some flicker of protest, but she stayed still. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. A single tear escaped down her cheek, but meant nothing when she didn't move, didn't fight, didn't reach for me. My father's shadow swallowed her whole, and she let it. That was the betrayal that crushed me more than the words themselves, the silence of the people who were supposed to love me most. It's one thing to be hated. It's another to be abandoned. I felt my chest tighten, rage boiling beneath the surface, mixed with a grief so heavy it was hard to breathe. My throat was raw, but I forced the words out. Fine. If I don't belong here, then I'll go. No one stopped me. No one tried to hold me back. No one begged me to stay. I grabbed my backpack from the corner, threw in what I could, some clothes, a toothbrush, a few things I didn't even look at. My hands shook as I stuffed them inside, not because I didn't want to leave, but because I wanted someone, anyone, to stop me. My mother could have stood up, placed a hand on my shoulder, whispered that she loved me. My sister could have crossed the room, told me I wasn't alone. Even my father, if he had softened for just a second, could have pulled me back from the edge. But none of that happened. They stood still and let me pack, as though I were nothing more than a tenant finally moving out. When I slung the backpack over my shoulder, the house suddenly felt foreign. The walls I had touched since childhood looked strange, cold, unrecognizable. The photographs on the mantel, our family smiles frozen in time, looked like lies, jokes played on me by a crueler version of fate. I had lived here my whole life, but now it seemed like I had never belonged. My mother followed me as far as the door. She reached out as if she might touch me, but stopped short, fingers curling into a fist. Her voice was barely a whisper. Please don't do this. But it was too late. She had already done it by saying nothing when it mattered. Her plea was hollow, fragile, as weightless as air. My father stood behind her, arms still crossed, a stone statue of authority. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched me leave. And my sister, the one who used to laugh with me in the backyard, who used to sneak me candy when my father wasn't looking. She turned her back. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look at me. I stepped outside, and the night air hit me like a slap. Cold, sharp, unrelenting. For the first time, I felt both free and utterly crushed. The door closed behind me with a heavy thud that echoed in my chest. That sound was the final seal, the final proof that I was out, unwanted, cast off. The street stretched out in front of me, dim under the weak glow of streetlights. My backpack weighed more than it should have. Every step felt heavier, as though the house itself was pulling me back, but there was no turning back. Pride kept me moving. Anger pushed me forward. And beneath it all, loneliness whispered in my ear, reminding me that I had no one left. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what would come next. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. My family had made their choice, and now I had to live with it. I was 25 years old, standing on a Texas road with nowhere to go, feeling the sting of betrayal so deep it burned into my bones. And as I walked into the darkness, every step carried a question that refused to leave me. If the people who were supposed to love me most could throw me away so easily, then who in this world would ever truly accept me? When the door of my house shut behind me that night, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought walking away from the people who had cast me out would give me some sort of freedom, that leaving behind their judgment would mean I could breathe again. But freedom is a strange thing. It feels light for a moment, and then it begins to weigh on you, pressing against your chest until you realize it comes with a price. Mine came in the form of an empty road, a near-empty wallet, and no plan beyond putting one foot in front of the other. The night stretched wide, the stars above scattered like pieces of broken glass, sharp and cold against the black. The pavement beneath my boots turned into gravel, then into dirt, as if the town itself was spitting me out, refusing to let me stay within its borders. Every step carried me farther from the house that had once been mine, but also farther from everything familiar. My car was still parked in the driveway, but I hadn't even touched the keys. Driving back into town, seeking a friend's couch, begging for shelter, that would have meant admitting weakness, and I had too much pride left to show up on someone's doorstep like a wounded dog. I didn't want pity. I didn't want comfort. I wanted to feel like I was in control, even as control slipped through my fingers. I had maybe $40 stuffed into my pocket, enough for a few meals, maybe a tank of gas if I'd chosen to drive. But it wasn't enough for anything lasting, and the truth was I didn't want to be tied to the same gas stations and diners I'd known my whole life. So I walked. With every step, I convinced myself that somewhere ahead, beyond the silence, beyond the fields, beyond the endless Texas horizon, there had to be something better than what I had left behind. But the further I went, the quieter it became. At first, I could still hear the hum of cars on the highway, faint voices from houses I passed. Then, slowly, those sounds disappeared, swallowed by the night. What was left was the crunch of my boots on gravel, the rhythm of my breath, and the steady drum of my heartbeat, which seemed louder now that there was nothing to drown it out. The silence pressed in on me, foreign and suffocating. I wasn't used to quiet. The house I'd left behind had always been filled with noise, arguments, laughter, the television blaring in the background. Now, even my own thoughts felt too loud, bouncing inside my skull, accusing me, mocking me. As the road stretched on, the weight of what I'd done began to sink in. I had no destination, no map, no plan. I was walking away from everything I knew with nothing but a backpack of clothes and a body running on adrenaline. Anger had carried me out of the house, but anger fades, and when it did, doubt crept in to take its place. What if I had made the biggest mistake of my life? What if I had nowhere to go because there was nowhere for me? If the people who were supposed to love me the most had turned their backs, why would anyone else care? Hunger clawed at my stomach by the second day. I hadn't eaten since before the fight, and the few snacks I'd grabbed from the kitchen were gone within hours. I searched for wild berries along the roadside, but they barely took the edge off. By the third day, my legs were heavy, each step sending jolts of pain through my calves. My shoulders ached from the weight of the backpack, though it held almost nothing. Sweat clung to my shirt during the day, chilled my skin at night. I felt like I was unraveling piece by piece, my body betraying me as much as my family had. The field stretched endlessly on either side of me, flat land dotted with patches of trees, the occasional distant farmhouse glowing faintly in the dusk. I didn't dare approach them. Pride again, maybe, or fear. I didn't want to knock on a stranger's door, explain why I was wandering with no direction, confess that I had nowhere else to go. People in small towns talk, and I didn't need my story traveling faster than my feet could carry me. At night, I would collapse on the side of the road, lying in the grass or on the hard ground, staring up at the sky. The stars mocked me with their calm indifference. They didn't care if I starved or froze. They didn't care if I made it to tomorrow. They had been burning long before me and would keep burning long after. That thought should have humbled me, but instead, it filled me with bitterness. I wanted the universe to care, to throw me a sign, to tell me I wasn't completely alone in this vast, empty stretch of land. By the fourth night, my lips were cracked, my stomach gnawed at itself, and my chest felt hollow, as though something inside me had been scooped out. I caught myself wondering if this was it, if I would just keep walking until my body gave up and I crumpled in the dirt. A part of me almost welcomed the idea. At least it would be an end. At least it would be an answer to the gnawing question of whether I had any place left in this world. But even as that thought flickered, another part of me fought against it. Stubbornness, maybe. Pride again. The same pride that had carried me out of my father's house now demanded that I survive, if only to prove them wrong. To prove that I could live without their approval, without their acceptance. That I could carve out a life of my own, even if it nearly killed me. And yet, the doubts never stopped whispering. Why fight for a world that didn't want me? Why keep walking when even the people bound to me by blood had chosen to let me go? Maybe they were right. Maybe I was weak, irresponsible, selfish. Maybe I was nothing more than the disappointment they always claimed I was. Every mile I walked, I carried those questions with me like stones in my chest. I could feel them pressing down, heavier than the pack on my shoulders, heavier than the hunger twisting inside me. My boots blistered my feet, the sun scorched my skin, and the nights froze the sweat still clinging to me. Pain became my constant companion, whispering in rhythm with my doubts. Still, I kept moving, because stopping meant surrender. Stopping meant admitting they had been right, and I refused to give them that victory. The landscape began to change the deeper I went. The open fields gave way to thicker clusters of trees, the horizon darkening into shadows that felt alive. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of black branches and tangled roots that looked more like a barrier than a refuge. I hesitated at its edge, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. What if I got lost in there? What if I never came out? But then again, what did I have to lose? I had already been cast out. I had already been declared unwanted. If the world beyond that forest wanted to swallow me whole, maybe that was better than walking roads that led nowhere. So I stepped forward into the dark. The ground was uneven, covered with leaves and twigs that cracked beneath my boots. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, sharp and clean compared to the stale stench of my father's house. The silence was different here, heavier, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see if I would survive. Hours passed in a blur. My legs trembled, my body screamed for rest, but I pushed on until I collapsed against a fallen log. My chest heaved, my shirt clung to me with sweat, and my vision blurred as exhaustion pulled at the edges of my mind. I felt smaller than I ever had, swallowed by the enormity of the wilderness, by the fact that I was utterly, completely alone. And yet, somewhere beneath the hunger, beneath the fear, beneath the betrayal still burning in my chest, there was a spark. Small, fragile, but alive. For the first time, I realized that my life was no longer tied to theirs. They had let me go. They had declared me unwanted. But here, in the middle of nowhere, under a sky that didn't care whether I lived or died, I had a choice. I could stop, or I could keep walking. And though every part of me ached, though my body screamed at me to give in, I knew which choice I would make. Because if the world didn't want me, I would take it by force. If my family thought I didn't belong, I would prove them wrong by carving out a place where I did. The night pressed in around me, the trees whispering in the wind, and I sat there in the dark, hunger gnawing at me, doubt circling like a wolf, but pride and stubbornness still holding me upright. I didn't know what waited for me beyond the forest. I didn't know if tomorrow would be any better than today. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't finished yet. By the third day of walking, I was unraveling. My legs no longer felt like they belonged to me. Every step sent sharp jolts through my calves. Each breath scraped my lungs like sandpaper. The straps of my backpack had carved grooves into my shoulders, the skin beneath raw from friction. My mouth was dry, my stomach a hollow pit that growled at me louder than my own thoughts. I had eaten nothing but a handful of berries the day before, and even those had left me queasy. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a gray ribbon dissolving into the horizon. The air was heavy with heat, shimmering above the asphalt, and I stumbled more than once as my vision blurred. I thought about stopping, about sitting down and letting the world decide what happened next. Maybe I would faint, maybe I'd be found, maybe I'd never rise again. A strange calm came with that thought, a dangerous whisper telling me I had done enough, that I could rest now, even if it meant the end. But then I heard it, a steady, rhythmic sound in the distance. At first faint, almost like the echo of my heartbeat, but growing louder, clearer. The unmistakable thud of hooves striking the ground. My eyes lifted, squinting through the haze, and there he was, emerging from the line of trees like a figure from another century. A man on horseback, his silhouette framed by the fading light of evening, the horse's dark mane rippling with each step. I froze, too weary to run, too dazed to decide if I should feel relief or fear. In a place like this, far from town, meeting a stranger could mean salvation or danger. I had no reason to trust anyone, not after what I'd been through. My body tensed, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The horse slowed as it approached, hooves crunching against the dirt. The rider pulled gently on the reins and brought the animal to a stop a few feet from me. He dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with a quiet thud. He looked rugged, his clothes worn by work and dust, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. Everything about him screamed that he belonged to this land in a way I never had and never would. But when he stepped closer, I saw his eyes. Not hard like my father's, not sharp with judgment, but steady, curious, and touched with a kindness I hadn't seen in years. His voice was low, and even when he spoke, as if he didn't want to startle me. "You all right there, son?" The words broke me more than I expected. No one had asked me that in so long. Not really, not sincerely. My throat felt dry. My pride wrestled with my desperation. I wanted to say I was fine, that I didn't need help, but the truth was written all over me. The hollow cheeks, the slump of my shoulders, the way I clutched my backpack as though it were the last piece of me left. I don't know. I admitted, my voice cracking in a way that betrayed me. He studied me for a long second, then crouched so our eyes were level. "Been out here long?" he asked. 3 days, I said. "Maybe more. I've lost track." He nodded slowly, as though that explained everything. His gaze softened, and he pulled a flask from his saddlebag, holding it out to me. "Here, drink." The cool metal pressed into my palm, and I drank greedily, water spilling down my chin as it hit my parched throat. It was the sweetest thing I had tasted in days. When I finally lowered the flask, I muttered a hoarse, "Thank you." "You look like you could use more than just water," he said, his voice calm but certain. He turned back to his horse, retrieved a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and handed it to me. Inside were thick slices of bread and dried meat. The smell alone nearly undid me. I hesitated for a moment, clinging to the last shred of pride I had, but hunger won, and I ate, each bite grounding me back into the world. As I chewed, he leaned casually against a tree, arms crossed, but his eyes never left me. Finally, he asked, "What brings you out here?" The question lingered in the air, heavy, unavoidable. I could have lied. I could have said I was traveling, wandering, looking for adventure. But something about him, the way he had given without asking anything in return, the steadiness in his eyes, made me want to tell the truth. My family, I said slowly. We fought. They didn't want me anymore. So I left. The words burned as I spoke them, but saying them out loud also freed me. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the secret alone. His face didn't twist with judgment the way I had feared it might. Instead, he nodded, as if he understood something deeper than what I'd said. That's a hard road to walk, he murmured. Harder when you walk it alone. Those words hit me harder than the food in my stomach. Nobody had ever said it like that before. Not as an insult, not as pity, just as truth. I didn't know where else to go. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought maybe out here I'd find something, maybe a place where I could figure out who I am without them. He regarded me for a moment, then a small smile touched his lips. Not mocking, not pitying, just steady warm. Well, he said quietly, you found me. Something in the way he said it stirred a warmth in my chest, a fragile flicker I hadn't felt in years. He extended his hand. Come on, you don't look like you'll last another night out here. I've got food, a roof, and a spare bed. You can stay, at least until you've got your feet under you. I stared at his hand, hesitation gnawing at me. Trust didn't come easy anymore, not after what I'd lost. But the exhaustion in my bones left little room for pride, and the kindness in his eyes spoke louder than my doubts. Slowly, I reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, grounding. He pulled me up with ease, steadying me when my knees buckled. For the first time since leaving home, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten, if only a little. As we walked toward his horse, he glanced at me. Name's Michael, he said simply. I gave him mine, the sound strange on my tongue after so much silence. He helped me onto the horse, climbing up behind me with practiced ease. The animal shifted beneath us, steady and sure-footed, carrying us away from the road that had nearly swallowed me whole. The last light of the sun filtered through the trees, bathing us in gold as the forest closed around us. I leaned back slightly, the rhythm of the horse soothing my tired body, and for the first time in days, I let myself breathe. Relief washed over me, not just from the water or the food, but from something deeper. I wasn't alone anymore, and though I didn't know it yet, that moment, when a stranger stopped on the roadside, looked at me without judgment, and chose to care, was the beginning of everything. The spare bed in Michael's house was warm enough, though rough compared to what I had known before. The quilt smelled faintly of cedar, the pillow was thin, but it was shelter, it was safety, and for a moment that was enough. Yet even with my body screaming for rest, sleep did not come easily. Shadows from the fire in the main room spilled across the floorboards, flickering like restless ghosts. I lay there for what felt like an hour, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the silence pressing in until I finally gave up. I pushed the quilt aside and padded quietly into the main room. The fire was still alive, though lower now, glowing softly in the hearth. Michael sat in a chair, his boots off, long legs stretched toward the flames. He didn't startle when I entered. He just looked up, steady and calm, as though he had expected me all along. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice low, blending with the crackle of the fire. I shook my head, sinking into the couch across from him. Too much noise up here. I tapped my temple. He gave a small half-smile. Nights can be the loudest. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was heavy, charged, as if both of us carried stories pressing against our ribs, waiting for the right moment to break free. Finally, I exhaled and let mine out. My family doesn't want me, I said, the bluntness surprising even me. The words fell into the air like stones, impossible to take back. Michael didn't flinch. His eyes stayed steady, patient, as though he had heard 100 hard stories before and could handle one more. The firelight threw shadows across his face, sharpening the lines of a man who knew solitude too well. They said I was a burden. I continued, my voice rough, that I wasn't enough, never strong enough, never good enough. Every look reminded me of how much I'd failed them. So I left. Or maybe I was pushed out. Either way, I don't belong there anymore. The admission scraped raw, but speaking it aloud was like lancing a wound. Painful, but strangely freeing. Michael leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't interrupt, didn't question. He just listened, and somehow that was more powerful than any words. I thought if I left, I said slowly, maybe I'd find something. Maybe I'd become the kind of person they could be proud of. But most days I just feel lost, like I'm chasing something that doesn't exist. My voice cracked then, betraying the ache I tried to bury. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, with a slow breath, he spoke. You're not the only one who knows that feeling. I lifted my gaze, and in his eyes I saw something deeper, something that made me still. I had someone once, he said. His voice was steady, deliberate, drawn from a place he didn't often touch. Years back. She was good, gentle in a way that made the world softer. I thought we'd spend forever together. He paused, jaw tightening. But forever doesn't always last. One winter, sickness came through fast. By spring, she was gone. The fire popped in the silence that followed. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the flames. I stayed on the ranch, worked the land. But after that, it wasn't the same. The days got longer, the nights quieter. Folks came and went, but no one stayed. After a while, I stopped expecting anyone to. His words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Loneliness. Loss. Not the same shape as mine, but cut from the same fabric. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry, I said softly, though the words felt small against the weight of his story. He shrugged, though his eyes never left the fire. Life doesn't ask permission before it takes, but the emptiness it leaves behind, that lingers. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of two people holding pieces of each other's sorrow. The weight wasn't gone, but it wasn't just mine now. It helps, I admitted after a while, my voice barely above a whisper. Saying it out loud. Having someone hear it. That's because we're not meant to carry it all alone, Michael said gently. I turned toward him, and our eyes met. His were steady, unflinching, yet softer now, like the fire had melted something in him, too. For a moment, I saw myself reflected there, not as a failure, not as a burden, but as someone worth hearing, someone worth seeing. We sat like that, the fire crackling between us, our gazes locked in a silent understanding that words could never quite capture. It said, I see you. I understand. Then he shifted slightly, leaning closer, and reached across the small space between us. His hand settled on my shoulder, not firm, not heavy, just steady. An anchor in the storm. You're not broken, he said quietly. You're just searching, same as me. The heat of his hand spread through me, quieting the tremor in my chest. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. His touch, his words, they cracked something open inside me that I hadn't realized I'd been protecting. All my life, I had wanted someone to understand, to look at me without judgment, without expectation. And here, in the quiet of a stranger's home, I finally felt it. I nodded slowly, unable to trust my voice. He didn't press. His hand lingered just long enough to ground me before he pulled back. The absence was sharp, but the imprint remained. We didn't speak for a while after that. The fire burned lower, shadows lengthening around us. Outside, crickets chirped in the dark. The air inside the house felt different now. Lighter, but charged, as though something fragile but undeniable had been created in that moment. At last, Michael stood, stretching slightly. You should try to rest, he said. His voice carried a softness it hadn't before. I nodded, though I didn't move right away. I sat there, watching the flames, feeling the echo of his hand on my shoulder. My chest still ached, but it wasn't the hollow ache of emptiness anymore. It was the ache of something beginning to heal. When I finally returned to the small bed, the quiet followed me. But it was no longer heavy. It was companionable, even in his absence. I lay down, staring at the beams above me, until sleep pulled me under. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, my dreams weren't filled with rejection or wandering. They were filled with belonging, with the possibility of being truly seen. Morning on Michael's ranch came quietly, without the jarring noise of alarm clocks or the hum of traffic. The sun rose, slow and deliberate over the horizon, spilling golden light across the fields, turning the dew on the grass into 1,000 tiny flames. I stepped out onto the porch barefoot. The wood cool beneath my feet, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. The air smelled of earth and horses, clean and sharp, carrying a sense of life that no city and certainly no broken house of my past had ever offered me. Michael was already outside, of course. He moved with a rhythm that belonged to the land itself, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust as he fed the horses, checked the fences, and made sure everything around him stood strong. When he turned and saw me, he lifted a hand in greeting, his face softening into something that felt dangerously close to welcome. It unsettled me how natural it all seemed, as though I had been here far longer than a handful of days. A part of me wanted to resist it, to remind myself that this wasn't permanent, that I was still just a guest in a stranger's house. But another part, the part that had been starved for belonging for so long, wanted to cling to it with everything I had. I joined it by the fence, helping to fill troughs with water and scatter hay. My movements were clumsy at first, the work foreign to my hands, but Michael didn't mock or correct me. He guided me gently, with a patience I wasn't used to. It was work, yes, but there was a strange kind of peace in it. The horses nudged me, their warm breath against my skin, and when one shoved hard enough to almost knock me over, Michael's laughter filled the air, deep and genuine. The sound startled me more than the push itself. It was the kind of laughter that reached past the ears and pressed into your chest, disarming in its simplicity. I laughed too, though it felt strange, as though I were testing out a sound I hadn't made in years. And in that laughter, something cracked open. For a moment, the weight of betrayal and abandonment fell away, replaced by something lighter, something that whispered, maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. We spent the day working side by side, hammering planks into place on a fence, brushing down horses, clearing tools. My muscles ached, sweat ran down my back, but instead of draining me, it filled me with a kind of energy I hadn't known I still carried. Work here wasn't punishment. It was an obligation forced on me by someone else's expectations. It was choice, partnership, life being built piece by piece. At midday, we sat on the porch, sharing bread and coffee. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't the silence of strangers or the silence of judgment. It was easy, companionable, the kind of silence that said nothing needed to be proven. And yet, beneath that calm, a storm still churned inside me. Every time I let my guard down, every time I allowed myself to feel safe here, a voice rose in my head. This isn't yours. You don't deserve this. They'll take it away, just like before. That night, when the chores were done and the house quiet, I sat by the fire while Michael read a worn book in his chair. The flames snapped and hissed, shadows climbing the walls, and I felt the weight of the question pressing on me. Was this the end of my wandering? Was I meant to stop here, or was this just a pause before the road swallowed me again? I stared into the flames until the words finally escaped. I don't want to keep running, I said quietly. Michael looked up, his eyes steady. Then don't. It's not that simple. I argued, the frustration raw in my voice. My family didn't just push me out, they erased me. They made it clear I don't belong anywhere. What if they were right? He set the book aside, leaned forward, and met my gaze without flinching. They were wrong. His tone was calm, but unyielding. They let their fears speak louder than love. That doesn't make them right. It makes them blind. His words struck me with a force I hadn't expected. No excuses, no pity, just truth. You belong where you choose to belong, he continued. Home isn't what you're given. It's what you build. For a long time, I couldn't answer. My throat tightened, my eyes burned, but behind the pain was a spark, small, fragile, but real. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that home could be chosen, that I could build something of my own, stronger than the wreckage I had left behind. The days that followed blurred into rhythm. Morning chores, laughter in the fields, simple meals by the firelight. Each task stitched another thread into a fabric I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't grand, it wasn't luxurious, but it was real. And real was more than I had dared to hope for. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, we sat on the porch, mugs of coffee cooling in our hands. The world around us was quiet, save for the low murmur of crickets, and the occasional nicker of a horse. Michael leaned forward, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made my heart race. "You don't have to keep walking," he said. "You could stay. Stay here. With me." The words landed heavy, more terrifying than comforting at first. To stay meant to choose. To stay meant risking another betrayal, risking that this too could crumble, but also meant daring to believe in something more than survival. I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw no judgment, no demand, only a quiet hope, fragile but unshakable. My throat tightened. "I don't want to go anywhere else," I admitted softly. "Out there I had nothing. But here it feels like everything I was searching for." The silence that followed was thick with meaning. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just two men sitting on a porch, recognizing that the search was over, that the wandering had found its end. From that moment, the ranch wasn't just Michael's. It was ours. The fences we repaired, the meals we shared, the nights we survived side by side. They all became part of something greater. Not an escape from the past, but a victory over it. I knew the world outside might still whisper its doubts. I knew the people I had left behind might never understand. But as the days turned to weeks, and the weeks into something resembling a life, I realized none of that mattered. What mattered was here. What mattered was choice. The boy who had walked away from his family with nothing but anger and despair was gone. In his place stood a man who had carved out something no one could take from him. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running, but the kind that comes from finally standing still and deciding who you are, no matter what the world says. Home wasn't where I was born. Home was where I was finally seen, finally accepted, finally free. And on that porch under the wide Texas sky, I knew I had found it.